Welcome to another T.REX Arms political update for 2024. We're going to talk about what's happening in the entire country, but let's start locally and let's start with Tennessee. Here in Tennessee, things are kind of back to business as usual, which is nice because last year during the special session, this place was packed with protesters. Things were extremely contentious because we were talking about passing red flag laws here. And you can watch this video to show how that went and how those bills were killed. But now things are back to, as I said, normal. And that means that here in Tennessee, because it is a conservative state, there are gun bills being discussed right now, because we are still in session, gun bills that would add a little bit of firearm freedom, and a bunch of those are going to pass. And then there are also bills suggested which would remove some firearm freedoms, and a bunch of those are going to fail. Most of those are small, they're tiny bills. They're not actually the big sweeping ones like last year's red flag law was going to be. And that is actually how things work in most of the country, about 2/3 of the states. And probably the best indication of this is permitless carry, constitutional carry. 2 more states passed permitless carry this year, Louisiana and South Carolina. And that brings the total to 29. Now remember that 25 years ago, we didn't even have constitutional carry except in one state, Vermont. And local legislatures like these right here, this is the Senate chambers, this is a very small number of people who are elected to these positions that make these laws, pass laws that, well, this is the law right here. This is Tennessee Code annotated. These are the laws that are on the books. These are the books. This is what gets added to or subtracted from as congressmen and senators change those laws. And like I said, about 2/3 of the country have decided they want more firearm freedoms, not less. Now, even though Tennessee states and states like Tennessee are continuing to pass gun freedom legislation even as we speak, I don't think that the number of states with, say, permitless carry is going to be more than 29 for a while. Essentially, the 2/3 of the country that would like more gun freedoms and more freedoms for its people in general, they are going to continue to do that. And then the other third of the country that would like fewer gun freedoms for their people and fewer freedoms in general are going to continue to move in that direction, but with some limits. The good news is that states like New York and California and others that are obviously anti-gun, obviously would like to remove firearm freedoms from as many of the citizens as possible and infringe upon their rights as much as possible. They are running into some obstacles. And the biggest one is the Bruen decision from the Supreme Court a few years ago, which basically has set a legal precedent that defends gun rights. And a lot of their anti-gun legislation, even from the past, has already been struck down. So it's going to be a major issue passing stuff in the future, especially those steamroller kind of bills like we used to get in the 90s, those blanket bans, stuff like that is kind of going to be a thing of the past. Instead, we're seeing new and creative workarounds. States like Hawaii, they have a new interesting experiment, which is to say that tribal law of Hawaii supersedes the state constitution and the federal constitution, and we'll see if that stands up in court. But New York and California and other states are trying to do these experimental bills, trying to find new strategies and new workarounds for the Bruen decision, trying to find stuff that will stand up in court. And it's going to be interesting stuff. Storage laws, taxes on ammunition, background checks for ammunition, stuff that doesn't do the old-fashioned style of gun bans. And I just don't see those coming back anytime soon, at least at the state level. And remember that this is going to keep happening at the federal level as well. The Supreme Court decisions affect the federal government, and then of course the Second Amendment exists to restrict the federal government. So there are bills that will be these same kind of workarounds. There are some excessive taxes on firearms and ammunition. There's an anti-training bill, which is supposed to ban any type of military type training that would benefit the militia, which, you know, technically I should point out is also defended by the Second Amendment. And then there's the zombie gun bill, which is supposed to restrict not just firearms themselves, not just the serialized lower receiver, but all firearm parts. And it's trying to be emotionally manipulative in the same way that ghost guns were. You know, ghost guns are so scary. Zombie guns, obviously a great catchphrase to pass a new piece of legislation. But all of these are pretty new and pretty experimental. If they are passed, they're pretty much all going to be tested in a court of law. So there's some other stuff that you need to think about besides the legislative side. There is that judicial side. There are judges that will hear these things. There are local DAs that will allow lawsuits against firearm companies. There are several different ways where these rights are under attack. And then another obvious one is from the executive branch. So obviously there are going to be rules and procedures handed down by agencies. And we actually have a new agency just as of a week ago. It is called NERPORC, which stands for the National Emergency Risk Protection Order Center. And its goal is to equip states like Tennessee so that they can pass red flag laws and enforce red flag laws better. The same thing that we just got finished dealing with last year. So that is all coming down the pike. It's all something that you need to keep a close eye on. But there is an additional threat vector that I would like us to think about. And not all of this pressure is going to be directly from the government. There's a huge amount of pressure that is coming from corporate entities in the private sector. So just for example, T.REX Arms is banned from PayPal and we're banned from Square. We've had to change card pressers a few times. We've had to change insurance companies, underwriters, banks. Some of this stuff though is government pressure. For example, we learned last couple weeks that the FBI asked Bank of America for help in tracking down some of those pesky January 6ers. And the Bank of America very helpfully provided a large list of anybody who had purchased anything in the Washington, D.C. area around those dates and had also purchased a firearm ever. So that is the sort of collaboration between the public sector and the private sector that has a very chilling effect on our personal freedoms and rights, or even firearm purchases and firearm ownership in general. So that's the sort of stuff to keep an eye on, particularly since it is an election year. There's going to be lots of talk about election meddling, interference, misinformation, more demand for controls, censorship, and insight into what people are saying and talking about. Also, this last couple of weeks, we learned that the FBI has been asking YouTube for lists of people who watched certain videos. I'm not sure which, but it's not this video. Not yet, anyway. There is a lot going on and a lot to pay attention to at the national level. And as stuff continues to happen, it's going to capture your attention. Donald Trump is very entertaining at the moment, and as it's an election year, he's getting a huge amount of attention. But what's happening in your local state houses is, I think, going to matter more. That is where the needle is moving the most. And as these different directions for and against freedom come closer into conflict with one another, the state house is the place where you are going to have the most influence. Your vote is going to matter more. Remember, the Senate chambers over there only have a few chairs in them. The representatives have a bigger room, there's more of them, but only 100. These are the men and women who are making the changes to the Tennessee law that are going to defend Tennessee citizens' freedom. The same is true in your states. If you are in that 2/3 of America that desires more freedom, your vote is going to matter a lot. So as important as it is to pay attention to what is happening on the national stage, pay attention to what is happening locally right now with your local session, the laws that are being passed, because it's an election year. Primaries are coming up and the votes are coming up. And you being informed about who is actually on your side in this room and actually moving the needle in the right direction is going to be the best possible defense for America. So hopefully that was a helpful and informative video. And like most things that are happening on the national and local stage, it's always a mix of good and bad news. So yes, the ATF, for example, is raiding people's homes, which results in them getting shot. This happened last week in Arkansas, but on the plus side, the e-forms are finally getting processed quickly, which means less wait for suppressors. So there is that. Well, that reminds me, we make a sidecar attachment now at T.REX Arms that allows you to carry a suppressor concealed. So if you were wondering if this is going to be one of those videos that the FBI asked about later, now it is.